Bachelor for Life here with the Buck Alpha folder. You can see the rust on this thing. I just picked this up off of eBay. It was in pretty rough condition when I got it. The blade itself, dull. The handles are in pretty good condition, but there were some rust spots kind of scattered throughout the handle. So I wanted to take the wood grips off and just kind of get an idea of what I was working with. This thing was pretty sloppy when I was opening it and closing it. So basically what I was going to do, check everything out, spray it with brake clean. And the reason I do that, I kind of douse it in brake clean, probably get a little crazy, but for the most part I'm trying to make sure that all the spots that have any kind of rust on it, I lay it down on that, and then I lay it across the blade itself and the handle, so it can kind of dry out any moisture, any oils or grimes or anything that's on there, so I can kind of start fresh. Now the other thing was the washers. The way it opened and closed, I was kind of afraid that there might be some deformities to the washers, so I was kind of checking those out, cleaning them off too. There was some grime. I don't know what, if any, the last person used for oil, but there was a residue on it. It was almost like a glue. It was really rough. So I cleaned that all off, and then I wiped the blade down, trying to just kind of scratching at with my fingernail and with the towel there, just to see if I can get some of that rust to come off. But it was pretty well set in there. The second step that I use to get the rust off, I douse it in CLP, the cleaner, lubricant, and preservative, made by Safariland. I like this stuff. I use it on my guns. It does a really good job of kind of keeping things from rusting, number one, but also actually cleaning the rust off. So here's a little more oil, and I get pretty crazy with the oil. I was trying to literally give it an oil bath. I couldn't get the handle apart. The pins were in there pretty good, and I really didn't want to bend it or anything, trying to get it out, because essentially I plan to probably resell this knife at some point. So I wanted to make sure that I kind of left it intact. Now when I did this, after I got done dousing it, I let it soak in that oil for about an hour, maybe a little bit more. So this is actually me coming back because I was impatient. I came back and I decided to wipe down the wood handles a little bit. I just put a little dab of oil on there and then just kind of wiped them clean, so they really shined up good. The second portion, I went in and went through all the nuts and screws and torque heads and all that, wiped those all down. It doesn't look like anybody had actually ever torn this apart before. None of the screw heads were deformed at all, and I was trying to kind of show that in the picture. And basically when I come back to it, then I take just a soft bristle toothbrush, make sure that I've got plenty of oil on the bristle head, and then I just sit there and scrub it, just like if you were trying to clean the floor or scrub the kitchen sink or toilet or whatever. And the toothbrush, I like it because you can actually get the bristles in between all the little holes, and even in the logo where it shows the buck logo, and then on the other side where it shows it's 154 cm, it is etched in there, so it's kind of deep. Now once I was doing this, I thought about going to town on it and trying to get all of that out of there. I did get most of the rust and stuff off of that portion, but the actual letters, they kind of had a dark tint to it, and I thought it looked kind of cool, so I kind of left that in there. But I did clean it out quite a bit. Now I'm kind of when you kind of pull up that blade, I slow this down a minute so you can actually see the blade. Virtually no rust left. All the rust spots are gone. You'll notice that the stonewash finish hasn't been affected at all. It really did shine up really nice. There are some imperfections on the blade itself that I just can't get out without like buffing it out, but I didn't want to go crazy. Like I said, I don't really want to change the life of the knife, kind of the whole you know, where it's been and what it's seen. So I just scrubbed it and scrubbed it and scrubbed it with the toothbrush until most of it came off. And you really don't have to get that aggressive. It's really just once you put that CLP on there and let it soak, it eats into it. And then basically wiped it off and started working on the handle. Did the same thing. The handle wasn't as rusty, didn't have any of the rust spots or anything like that, but I scrubbed it down just as well, because you know, even if I can't see it with the naked eye, there could be some rust forming. It probably took me about 30 minutes, I think, overall, 35 minutes overall, if you don't count the hour that I waited in between to let it soak in the CLP. The biggest thing is just trying to, you know, take your time. Don't get crazy. Don't get impatient. A lot of people will try to hit it with sandpaper. Steel wool is another one. Steel wool's terrible on knives. It messes up the finish and it just makes it look ugly. So my final step here is to take a couple of Q-tips and just make sure I'm digging out all of the extra oil, and also kind of spreading it around. But then also what it does is, obviously there's dust and stuff in the air, so some of that gets picked up by the oil, and you really don't want to leave much oil behind. You want it pretty well wiped down and cleaned off as best as you can. The oil kind of soaks into the pores of the metal as it is, and if you're using a good oil like the CLP, you don't have to, just like with your guns, you don't have to leave gobs and gobs of it. It'll do its job, just the residue that's left on the metal. Now, with that being said, I will occasionally put a little bit of oil on it, like as a field clean, but for the most part, I just kind of let it be for a little while until the next time I take my knife apart and clean it. So this is a pretty typical thing that I'll do with my knives. And the washers, believe it or not, are probably the most important part of the whole thing. Obviously you want to look for big obstructions that are in the liner lock and things like that, but if the washers get gunked up, that's where you're going to see most of your problem. So once I got done cleaning everything up, I decided to put it back together. This is kind of a process, trying to line up the washers. One of the washers on this Buck Alpha is actually, it's got a flat side, so it's like a half moon. So when you put the nut through, or the screw through, you've got to kind of line that up. And if you've ever put a 1911 back together, that's the best way I could describe it. It's like putting a 1911 back together. So once you get it lined up, it kind of pops right through, and then you can easily screw it back together. I didn't put any Loctite or anything on this, mainly because I want to be able to probably pop it apart again before I sell it, because I want to make sure that it's cleaned. That way the next person that gets it does not get it in the same condition I did. I will say, once I was done, I was actually really surprised how smooth it opened. It flicked solid. I mean, it was a solid lockup. I did find a chunk at one point that was in there, in the liner lock. So that was, I mean, I think that was part of the reason, you know, when I opened it, I wasn't getting a clean, you know, solid snap with that liner lock. The liner lock on this is kind of thin. I'd appreciate it being a little bit thicker, just because your fingers are, you know, it's really the only thing that stands in the way from it collapsing on your fingers when you're using it. It did take me a little bit to kind of get it fine-tuned on the folding nut there, but once I did, I flicked it open a couple of times, really solid. And I don't know if you can tell from the pictures, but literally got all the rust off the blade. The handles were nice and shiny, and it didn't affect that stone wash at all. So I hope you like it. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you'd like to see more of these videos, I've got plenty of knives that need cleaned and sharpened, and I'll probably post something when I go to sharpen this, and maybe do like a little how-to video on how to sharpen. So that's the life out.